The world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. We've all got both light and dark inside us.
Are you sure about that?
Ah, the four Hogwarts houses, a cornerstone of Harry Potter iconography, a lucrative engine that powers a lot of the brand's merchandise. These symbols and colors are tattooed onto my cerebral cortex forever. They are a smart, simple piece of world building functioning as a question, a jumping off point to inspire children to imagine themselves attending a wizard school, doing, wizard things like not receiving a well-rounded education. The Hogwarts houses are, if memes are to be believed, Gryffindor, smart, yellow, and last but not least, evil. Despite my love for Harry Potter, I've always been more interested in the characters, and I adore the general setting, but I have a lot of issues with the world building that stem from problems in the books. Some of it's kind of funny and mostly harmless, like Rowling's really bad at math and it creates a lot of embarrassing mistakes. Other times it's infuriating, like the house elves that love being slaves until you beat them too much. And the biggest subplot involving freeing them is more about how Hermione did activism wrong by ignoring the people she was advocating for. You gotta listen to people when you're advocating for them. So, just accept that the Hogwarts kitchen is filled with sentient creatures that keep insisting they love being slaves. That video will be like therapy I get paid for. Today, we're diving into something much more gray, elusive, slithery. We're talking about the handling of Slytherin House. Did Rowling botch it? Is Hogwarts or the story itself biased against Slytherin? Is it unrealistic? Can you intelligently explain why all the bad guys seem to share a dorm as children, or is it just indicative of J.K. Rowling's inability to see evil in the brave, the intelligent, and the well-meaning? And are fans drowning in their headcanons? All of it argued by a Slytherin. Oh yes, Pottermore certified. I was a snake the whole time. So if I start arguing Slytherin might need big reforms or a big Thanos snap, well, it's nothing personal, kid. I got skin in the game too. Not really, that's a lie. I got a comfy Hot Topic sweatshirt in the game. So let's start with an easy question. Is Slytherin really the evil house? Chapter 1. Yes, they really are the evil house and not our dark academia fantasy. I know it sucks, I hate it too. A lot of Slytherins are morally complicated people who fell off the path of good, but forget those melodramatic attention hogs for a minute. Just who's the average everyday Slytherin student? Well, some Harry Potter fans try so hard to rehabilitate Slytherin House, they will make memes and lengthy posts about how Slytherin traits could hypothetically produce a good person. They paint this picture of an ambitious, cunning, sarcastic friend who tells you like it is, but because of the fraternity trait is delightfully biased in your favor, and wants to undermine your enemies with subterfuge so that you can reign together and sip black coffee in your dark academia hallways and then run through spiraling dark green hedge mazes. Anyone who got into Harry Potter from seeing these posts would be disappointed by the books. Even if you've never been exposed to filthy fandom propaganda, I think most people on a gut level react to this situation with a healthy spoonful of skepticism. They go, no, what even is this? A den of evil children? It must be more complicated than that, and if it isn't, it should be. In any fandom, especially such an old one, people get bored and they just start playing with the universe as if it was a toy. Even with no new material, they can hype themselves up by making their own fun using their creativity. So people dedicate entire blogs to, for example, Pansy Parkinson. Except to them, Pansy is the idea of a Slytherin girl fueled mostly by the premise that rich, ambitious girls with jet black bobs look cool and you want to kiss them. Fans find great pleasure in pulling something complete out of tiny details that differentiate them from each other. So a character like Pansy is an original character wearing the skin of a minor character. This is how the fandom's concept of Slytherin evolves and is actually more complex and morally gray than the canon reality of Slytherin. The canon has very few gray characters and almost no good ones. And you can contrast that against the fact that there are almost no antagonists from other houses. There are technically 3, but really there's 2. The average Slytherin student Harry attended Hogwarts with, from Gregory Goyle to Theodore not in the movies, is a blurry blob of bullies, cheaters, and bad attitudes. This is so true that when Goyle's actor Josh Herdman got his arm hurted during the 3rd movie, they just swapped him out with another Slytherin boy. When Crabbe's actor Jamie Waylett got arrested for growing marijuana, the movies were like, okay, well if you're gonna blaze it, then we're gonna blaze it too, and then Blaze became the guy standing opposite to Goyle in Malfoy's squad. In fact, Goyle got to take Crabbe's place in the fiery grave because it just doesn't matter which one of them dies. The Cliff Notes is just Draco got to see his friend who didn't pull out of evil at the last second perish. So just kill the spat. I mean the one that got the most screen time. The bad guy cannon fodder, basically. I've seen people try to argue, well, the books are told from Harry's perspective and he's biased. And that's true, but Harry is not such an unreliable narrator as to make up dialogue for other people. This argument falls flat for me when a Slytherin student opens up their mouth and the only thing they have to say for themselves is lol mudblood or lol blood traitor. Or, and I love this example, it baffles me.
In the 6th book, Blaise Zabini, unlike Draco Malfoy,
Gets into the Slug Club, an elbow-rubbing dinner party club, presumably because Professor Slughorn, the club runner, has no reason to suspect his family are Death Eater aligned. But Rowling can't help herself. So Blaise is a dismissive jerk the entire night. He does a rude skepticism cough at Slughorn suggesting Harry survived the night of his parents' death because he may be extraordinary in some way. And for some mind-blowing reason, he somehow manages to infodump that his famously hot mom has been married 7 times and her rich husbands keep dropping dead under mysterious circumstances. How did he even do that? How did he just announce that he's indifferent to the fact that his mom is a serial killer? What could he have possibly said that caused this big of a misunderstanding in Harry's mind? I don't even think it's a good joke. It's just like, okay, I get it. They're all bad. Haha, it's so funny. There were opportunities to introduce a good or just neutral minor Slytherin student, and it just never happens. I'll give you a couple examples. The first one will be what I'll call a big ask, and the second one is like a little ask. So, and this is a popular like fandom idea. Hypothetically, what if the Hogwarts champion in Goblet of Fire was a Slytherin? Now this choice would be a shame since it's taking away one of Hufflepuff's few times to shine, but people argue this would be the perfect way to conclude the lighter half of the series, and I agree. If Cedric Diggory, or a hypothetical other Hogwarts champion, was a nice Slytherin boy who is killed in front of Harry just as he was starting to warm up to him, that collapses Harry's whole worldview of Slytherin bad, Gryffindor good. After all, the entire conflict is just the kiddie pool version of what's going on with the adults, right? In the adult wizarding world, it doesn't matter if he's Team Snake, if to Voldemort, he's just another blood traitor. Then there are decisions that seem much more about realism that require very little effort, nothing as big as an important character being in Slytherin. In the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore's army didn't make use of any Slytherins. This was one of the first times Harry got to hang out with people outside of his house for an extended project, but no Slytherins joined. In fact, they seemed to team up with Dolores and Filch. Inexplicably, everyone in the house tied to all magical families and ambition doesn't care that their school, which they need to make themselves more powerful, is turning into some type of muggle school where they don't practice magic in class. This is a very clear betrayal of what their house stands for and just their general cultural values. And doing something like this, creating secret classes in a hidden location, that seems very Slytherin. I think this displays the strange relationship Harry Potter as a series has with the Hogwarts houses. They take up so much time and oxygen and shelf space. And yet, while some significant characters come from other houses, really, it's only 2 houses that matter, but when you get a little bit closer, actually, it's just 1. It makes everything seem a bit more mechanical. It breaks the illusion that Hogwarts is a big place filled with unique students.
Well, they're not all bad. That would, I know I've said this before, and I think I said it to Emerson. They are not all bad, and well, far from it, as we know.
I would feel bad about avoiding talking about specific Slytherin characters who do good things. I don't want you to feel like I'm skipping over them because it's inconvenient, so let's talk about them. A lot. A lot. Let's start out with the most upstanding snakes snakes can't stand. Or are they always standing? Just the good, normal guys. No morally gray cutie pies. I have set the bar for unimpeachable goodness at the truly unreasonable standard of, was never a blood supremacist or a Death Eater. Gee willikers, let's see who clears it. First up we got Merlin, a wizard who thought wizard kind should be helping muggle kind, and he was in Slytherin. He was probably in the first class ever because he's as old as dirt. You know Merlin as a collectible in the Harry Potter video games and not as an actual character in the story.
Hey Harry, remember me? Ron Weasley.
Hello, Harry, it's me, Hagrid.
The Harry Potter wiki claims he is mentioned in almost every book and movie, but that's because his name is a wizard swear. That's a great snake right there. It takes a pet like no problem, right? Not afraid at all. And then we have Andromeda Tonks. She's Nymphadora Tonks' mother. No, movie fans, don't leave me. Okay, don't get scared. Stick with the most popular guys. All right, Draco's mother has two sisters. One is Bellatrix Lestrange, and the other is Andromeda, who is disowned for marrying a muggle-born wizard. And she's cool. She's an example of how pureblood families socially control each other to keep their pureblood status. They commonly use disownment as a threat. Finally, Horace Slughorn is the closest thing to a normal Slytherin in the entire series. He was introduced late. He's a socialite who loves throwing parties. He doesn't like conflict, but he has a good heart, and he comes through for Harry. In the books, he is casually blood racist in a bigotry of low expectations sort of way towards Muggleborns. But this dialogue is cut from the Half-Blood Prince movie, making Slughorn, I think, the only never blood racist named Slytherin character in the movie series. Wow. It doesn't even end there. They expanded on Slughorn's relationship with Lily. He expresses the shame he feels, how he feels responsible for Voldemort's creation just because he gave Tom information about Horcruxes. This is a student asking him about some pretty forbidden, sketchy information. But watching this scene, I can't help but feel that Horace was taken advantage of. Despite the fact that he's desperately trying to run from his mistakes out of shame, and the fact that he can come off as kind of a airy socialite, I think he's actually a very sweet man. So there he is, the good Slytherin. He's a good Slytherin. He's a good boy. Look at him. Wow. So guess what, guys? I was wrong. In Slughorn's first appearance, he does the same thing he did in the books, and I forgot. While I stand by my overview of him, no, he doesn't belong in this category anymore. So that's it. He was the best I had. He was the only one that was a real character, and I was wrong. Even he couldn't survive the standard I set. It's just ridiculous, and in case you're curious, even Dolores Umbridge was in Slytherin. Moving on. Some people, however, fell off the path of good and wandered back onto it. What do the Death Eater defectors say about the moral character of Slytherin House? Regulus Black, the betrayer of Voldemort, sacrificed his life to destroy a Horcrux, a thing Voldemort put a slice of his soul into to be immortal. Regulus inexplicably knew the Horcrux existed and where to find it, two precious secrets of a very violent and suspicious man. But he doesn't appear on screen, so the only canon picture I have of him to show you is this picture of a picture. His presence in the story is kinda tenuous, especially in the movies. When you Google image search his name, you'll be hit with a wall of models people use to represent him. He is a flash-in-the-pan plot point. More of a mood board than a man. Regulus reflects this idea of a renegade Death Eater betrayer, distraught and disillusioned, trying to find a scrap of redemption to undo some of the harm they've caused to the world. But I think, truthfully, he more so reflects the idea that sad, pale-faced pretty boys with dark hair look cool, and you want to kiss them. I'm about to pull some points I made in my Draco video to make this one a standalone, but it's good, you should watch it. Unlike some other characters more praised for their redemption arcs, Draco's actions in Deathly Hallows are more about small inactions, moments where he passively resists. And then he and his parents shrink into the shadows because Voldemort can no longer ensure their safety or power, and the only thing the Malfoys truly love is each other. There is no concrete evidence that Draco harbors a heart of gold. There is only evidence that he is much more sensitive than he appears. These aspects of himself that he's likely ashamed of, combined with Harry's Gryffindor nature and those key moments where he passively resists Voldemort, are the reasons why he survived the events of the story. Unfortunately, Draco's reform is largely off-screen. The biggest one is raising his son Scorpius to be normal and not a blood supremacist, a fact that's not even clear in the book's epilogue. It was just assumed and brought up on Pottermore / the Wizarding World. There is definitely symbolism that this is not Draco's true self, but it's not explored in any detail. Rowling doesn't seem to like Draco, much less like him enough to weave a redemption arc into the story for him. He and his fellow Slytherin friends are stand-ins for posh bullies she faced in her childhood. Narratively, he's a foil, or he's a mini-boss in the early installments of Harry Potter to give Harry something to worry about and compete with. He also teaches us about wizard supremacy culture.
Let me teach you about wizard crackers.
And it's sort of that simple. Most of the people on Voldemort's side are kind of underdeveloped, even though it'd be more interesting to many people if they weren't. But there is one Slytherin Rowling seems to like quite a bit.
Snape, Snape, Severus Snape, Snape, Snape. Severus Snape.
To promote Deathly Hallows, the bookstore Borders, before they were all closed down, had these promotional bookmarks and stickers they gave out that would say things like, "Trust Snape," and "Snape is a very bad man. He's very bad." Draco was actually held in higher regard by the fandom than Snape, probably because he was a teenager when all of that went down, and he raised his son to not have brainworms. Snape is more complicated. Severus Snape is sometimes considered to be the most emotionally complex character in the series, and he is sometimes considered to be a hot mess with an inadequate redemption arc that breaks its own hand patting itself on the back, because how much can you really redeem a character who spends most of his screen time and word count bullying children? As time marches on, I'm confronted with what I see as a failing on Rowling's part to make the audience see what she sees. I feel more and more alone in my genuine like of Snape as a character beyond appreciating Alan Rickman's acting. It seems like every year since the last movie came out, Snape has been rotting in the public consciousness.
Snape, will you accept this rose?
Fine, but wear this. Always.
I've observed the fandom do this slow penguin waddle from what I consider to be the canon reality of Snape, or even a candy-coated version of that reality, to, how do I put this delicately? Snape is literally an incel. He's got a simp Patronus, a simptronus, if you will. It's all because he's obsessed with Lily. He got friend-zoned by Harry's mom in Wizard High School. How is that a redemption arc? Okay, listen, with that kind of mindset, you can make any story sound stupid. Snape is notably divorced from most Slytherin Redemption Squad conversations, even though he's the head of Slytherin House and is a very Slytherin. But let's start here. Maybe this is a flaw in the writing, or something to keep in mind when reading or writing a story. The last thing a character does before they die is not necessarily what redeems them, but I think people feel emotionally that that is the case, in their guts. The part of the flashback that shows the beginning of Snape becoming a spy is not even technically presenting a reveal at all. Harry learns that Snape was a spy in, Goblet of Fire?
What about Snape? Severus Snape.
As the council is very much aware, I've given evidence on this matter. Severus Snape was indeed a Death Eater, and prior to Lord Voldemort's downfall, turned spy for us at great personal risk. Today he's no more a Death Eater than I am.
Remains faithful to the Dark Lord.
Silence! Therefore, learning that Snape truly was always on Harry's side gets overshadowed by the more emotional, surprising personal tragedy of his unrequited love for Lily Evans/Potter. Snape's feelings for Lily are context into his behavior, elaborating on what we learned about him in the Order of the Phoenix when it was made known that Harry's father and his friends were bullies. Harry's dad hexed people for fun, and they were obsessed with ganging up on Snape. If you think Snape loving Lily doesn't redeem him, you're not wrong, but I'm not sure if it was meant to. The redemption arc is he's been a spy for nearly 17 years, in a world where people can read your mind if you're not careful. Part of being a spy was killing the only person who knew him on a personal level, the only person that actually saw him for what he was. There is clear development that happens between 21-year-old Snape begging Dumbledore to hide the Potters, or at least Lily, and the 37-ish-year-old Snape horrified that Dumbledore has known the whole time that Harry was gonna have to die for the war to end. Quite frankly, I find this information delivered in a way that's confusing in the movie, especially for all of the people that are probably just gonna see the movie once or twice. I mean, once. Alan Rickman, although he made Snape so iconic, is 20 years older than the character he's playing. And since Snape and Dumbledore basically look the same, it almost looks like they're wearing the same outfits. I don't think you feel the weight of how much time has passed and how much Snape has changed. Not from mean man to nice man, but his moral fiber. He's put in the work. And I actually think it's the epilogue that's the final nail in the coffin for people that feel salty about Snape. When Harry named his son Albus Severus Potter, people felt Snape was disproportionately rewarded for his bad behavior. If you're not impressed with Snape, this is a story where a character built around a decade-spanning redemption arc did not redeem himself because he couldn't stop being awful to children. And to rub salt in the wound, he is honored after his death in favor of others, which is a recipe for resentment. If Harry needed a middle name for his son, there are many characters in the story that served as a paternal figure to him. Snape is not even breaking the top 5, and there are other dead men on that list. For me personally, I think it does imply an interesting emotional maturity Harry has after the war. But here's something that honestly does bother me. I can look at Snape, and because he's a fictional character, I can go, oh, what a fascinating broken man. Yes, I love the time I spent reading about Severus Snape. But I don't think people treat people in their life like that. Children grow to see the complexity and motivations of their authority figures, but they usually don't honor teachers that bully them. I've heard of that behavior before, but that kind of attachment seems more common in trying to sort your feelings out about an abusive or kind of lackluster parent. So it always kind of felt to me like Rowling worked backwards from the premise, oh, wouldn't it be cool if Harry named his son after that teacher that he hated? And like, that's true. It would be wild if you told someone after reading the first few books that Harry was gonna name his son after Snape. But I don't think it got where it needed to be. After Snape dies in Deathly Hallows, Harry doesn't have much internal dialogue about how he's processing the meaning of Snape's death to him. The descriptions are very matter-of-fact about it. And it's not like Rowling's incapable of writing emotionally deep deaths. Let me read something to you. This is one of my favorite passages in the whole series. This is when Harry goes to see Dumbledore's dead body in Half-Blood Prince. Then he gazed down at the wise old face and tried to absorb the enormous and incomprehensible truth that never again would Dumbledore speak to him. Never again could he help. I always really loved this. I like how it speaks to loss. And I like how the first thing Harry has to process is how death has robbed Dumbledore of his ability to speak to him. Both, those moments where Dumbledore says silly, whimsical things, but also his ability to protect and give wisdom. So going into Deathly Hallows, you can feel it. You feel that safety net is just gone. The only person Voldemort was afraid of is dead. So it's this beautiful summarization of Harry's relationship to Dumbledore. Snape's death scene, on the other hand, it's written well, but it's playing this effective emotional sleight of hand where, for a long time, I didn't question, where are Harry's thoughts in this scene? He has no thoughts, Snape dead, head empty. So this is the ultimate Slytherin. This is the Slytherin Rowling will fight you about on Twitter before she'd fight you about trans people. This is the Slytherin who makes the greatest sacrifice for the forces of good in the story, and his resume of good deeds is not impressing everyone. And it's because Rowling can't help herself. It wasn't enough for him to just be a strict, intimidating teacher. He has to be cruel. He has to turn a blind eye to Slytherin bullying. He has to mock Hermione's teeth when they're elongated by a curse. He has to threaten to kill Neville's pet if he doesn't get a potion right. So it doesn't matter if Snape saves Harry's life multiple times, because any adult would have done that. I mean, I guess it goes back to fundamental lessons, right? If you intend a character to be sympathetic or intend to redeem them, you have to throw in some save the cat moments. You have to be mindful of the character's perception. There's a careful balancing act happening here. Snape sometimes has moments where he's scary and getting in the way of Harry doing stuff, but upon rereads, he has a genuine reason to think Harry's up to something.
Congratulations, your performance in the Black Lake was inspiring. Gillyweed, am I correct? Gillyweed may be innocuous, but boomslang skin, lacewing flies. You and your little friends are brewing polyjuice potion, and believe me, I'm going to find out why.
That's moody, but then who's...
Polyjuice potion.
Now we know who's been stealing from your store, Severus.
Or Harry's actually breaking rules, and of course Snape's gonna give him a hard time, he's a teacher. I would have loved to see Harry reflect more on looking guilty or how his relationship with his teacher is falling apart because of misunderstandings. I think the reason Snape rots every year for a lot of people is as you grow up, you're able to put yourself in Snape's perspective more because you're an adult now. So you have more of an appreciation for how immature he is and how little his fixation on Harry is justified by the narrative. I want you to imagine that when you reread, you could see that Snape started out curious about what kind of person this kid was. He's intimidating and cold, but he's not really doing anything evil besides giving out a lot of homework. And any adult could recognize it's actually Harry being judgmental because he's thin, greasy-haired, all clad in black. He's described as looking like a giant bat. Imagine if Snape had logical reasons to think Harry was an egomaniac who behind the scenes was bullying children. And then he wrote him off and zeroed in on him. Then on top of that, Harry keeps getting in trouble. The next book he steals that car and exposes the wizarding world, etc., etc. If the inciting incident to this toxicity made sense, Harry would have his first encounter with being hated by an adult for reasons within his control. Instead of what happens in the story, which is, I don't know, Snape just kind of ignores all evidence that Harry is not pampered, and the writing almost appeals to this persecution complex, where Harry is Jesus on the cross and Snape is heckling him, and we're supposed to just throw up our hands and go, well, he's traumatized by Harry's father. Snape picks on Harry the first day for not paying attention, when in reality he's writing everything Snape says down. If Snape just peers at his notebook, he'll see it. This is a common mistake children make when taking notes. Then he asks a child raised by muggles questions about magical ingredients he can't possibly know to embarrass him. This isn't just about being mean. This character is not supposed to be stupid. His intelligence is a central trait. He's not supposed to be the Dursleys but at school. This wasn't handled properly. And at the end of the day, the way the narrative tries to make him an honorary Gryffindor because he's brave does come off as really weird. Like, most people will just say, oh my god, who the hell cares? And Slytherin fans are just gonna be like, why? He's one of the only Slytherin characters that fits Slytherin. There he stands, Slytherin stands, the most Slytherin of them all. And guess what, kids? Being sorted into Slytherin is directly responsible for ruining his life. Slytherin House clearly, overwhelmingly lacks nuance, as almost all the unmoral characters come from there. The few instances of Hogwarts attending non-Slytherin evil is a sniveling coward who is the antithesis of a Gryffindor and exemplifies the Slytherin trait of self-preservation, and one singular Ravenclaw who might have Ravenclaw motivations. It's not really explained. Snape comes off like a very obvious servant of Voldemort in the first book, so it seems Professor Quirrell mostly existed for the twist. It's kind of funny that this complexity never shows up in the book again. Rowling refuses at every moment, big and small, to just allow Slytherin students to be normal for like 5 seconds. The most morally ambiguous Slytherin characters have redemption arcs that much of the fandom is unsatisfied with. You can make a solid argument that they're not even meant to be completely redeemed, just, humanized and observed as complex actors in their story. Good Slytherins are almost non-existent until you get to the Cursed Child stage play. They are largely hypothetical fandom creations. That tells me this isn't just a place anyone can end up. Chapter 2. No, Slytherin makes sense world-building-wise, even if they are one-dimensional and it feels like a missed opportunity. Once in a while, I'll see young fans make strange arguments where they point out a way in which a fictional world is disturbing, and then they act like that's a mistake. Just as characters can be flawed and have contradictory, illogical, or dark sides, fictional settings and communities can also be flawed and have multiple sides to them. It's just a little harder to show this because locations can't usually talk directly to us. They are characterized by other things like sights, smells, and the people that inhabit that space. And Hogwarts is, despite how many children dream of going there, kind of an alarming place. By sorting students into houses, Hogwarts assigns stereotypes to all of its students on the first night, but Slytherin is the only house whose stereotypes are not wholly wholesome traits. And honestly, sometimes it seems like the things that make Slytherin look sketchy are superficial and would exist even if the house had no connection to dark wizards. The most obvious thing is the house's connection to a very stigmatized animal, the serpent, but the values the house centers itself around are also phrased oddly. Take the trait cunning. Ravenclaw words like smart or shrewd have similar meanings to cunning, but far more positive connotations. Likewise, what's the difference between Hufflepuff loyalty and Slytherin fraternity? The word fraternity makes me think of fraternity houses, so it makes me think of hierarchy, hazing, and stuffy social circles with no real intimacy. The word loyalty is warm and snuggly. It makes me think of a Labrador, even though everyone knows you can be loyal to a bad person. This makes something as simple as the in-group loyalty between Slytherins seem dangerous and creepy, even though it exists in every house. Rowling laughs in interviews about how she's got that Gryffindor showboatiness to her, but what's the difference between Gryffindor showboatiness and Slytherin pridefulness? It's basically the color scheme. All of this is a little stigmatizing, and upon observation, it seems like Slytherin students are the ones most likely to be sticky with each other. And have you ever noticed how a lot of characters don't fit their house? The most famous one is why is Hermione not in Ravenclaw, something so obvious it's asked by the characters in the story. But there are other examples. Fred and George Weasley are cunning pranksters who are ambitious about inventing new pranks and opening up a prank shop. Fred and George are the only people we see during the story actively working on new ways to use magic. They're using it for toys and pranks, but that's still what they're doing. That sounds very Ravenclaw, or a shoo-in for Slytherin if snakes had shoes. Oh, and consider the crab and the Goyle, if you will. They're in Slytherin, but their only personality trait is that they're dumb and strong. This idea that they're cunning is hysterical. But let me tell you what they really are. They are unofficial, unpaid bodyguards of Draco Malfoy. Imagine, if you will, the bravery, the nerve it takes every day just to keep Draco's teeth in his mouth. It's big Gryffindor energy is what I'm trying to say. Quite frankly, it's not only the dream of every skinny coward to have two huge dudes back you up, but also it's just like a Herculean task. But why does it work out this way? Well, personality is actually quite plastic, especially when you're a kid, and people are more versatile than we often give them credit for. Even within a narrative, most Harry Potter characters who have fleshed out personalities have more than one house you could hypothetically sort them into. Because the house traits are kind of vague and situational, and they blend together. They could apply to anyone at different times in their life. So, why are the snaky children in the dungeon? Well, the magic hat judges your personality and it sees your inner nature. You can't just pick whatever answer you want. Except that's exactly how it works. That's literally what Harry did. Harry comforts his son Albus in the epilogue by reminding him that if it means so much to you, you can just tell the hat not Slytherin. Dude, don't give me the house with the mandatory spooky lighting. I want to be able to read in my common room. The Sorting Hat does not place you for what you are. It places you for your values at age 11 that are probably just your family's values unless you're a serious black sheep. So let's set the stage for a new problem. Although there are no rules saying that people from different houses can't be friends with each other, they are separated most of the day in a sort of faux geographical divide. They have different living spaces where they have their own common rooms and dorms. Although they don't have strictly assigned seats at the Great Hall, most students sit with their house. This is prime socialization time for students because what's left? Seeing each other in the hallways? Or talking to people in class, if you're allowed? Oh, and days off, but by the time one of those comes around, you'll probably just want to spend it with your friends. And this us versus them, it's encouraged. The classroom is turned into a game with a house point system. Harry knows who belongs to what house on site without knowing names. So that leads fans to speculate that there must be some difference in their uniforms. And the movies make these differences more pronounced. It's considered so weird to root for someone else's Quidditch team that the only person who does it is Luna Lovegood, whose perhaps most distinctive personality trait is that she's weird. She's a weirdo. Have you ever seen Luna without her radish earrings? That's weird. Most of the time in the books, when two people from a different house are interacting with each other in a positive way, it has something to do with dating. So the main thing getting you to interact with people from other houses is looking up from your quill and being like, alright, you know what? If I had known all the hot people were gonna be in Ravenclaw, I would have showed up to the castle with a different mindset. I'm just letting that be known. It's a very Slytherin thing to say, isn't it? God damn it. Now, when I put all this together, it might sound like I'm saying, oh, poor snake babies, the school is biased against them. Nope, I don't think so. Slytherin is definitely gridlocked in conflict with Gryffindor, but it's reciprocal. The only example of bias I can think of is Dumbledore in the first installment dumping a ton of points on Gryffindor last minute, which causes Slytherin to lose the House Cup. And while Harry and his friends definitely earned those points, from the outside it looks random as all hell. And don't get me wrong, this is hilarious, I mean unfair, but Slytherin had won the House Cup 6 years in a row. And even once they begin losing, they're usually in second place. So teachers definitely award Slytherin students points for good behavior. If you're using house points as proof of bias, it's actually Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw who are having a hard time. You know, I'll remind you, all this Hogwarts nonsense has serious consequences in the adult magical world because it means all the little bigots get to fester together in the dungeon, where the password on the entrance to the common room in Harry's second year was literally pureblood. They're not socialized with many Muggleborns or people who don't share their beliefs, and they are the group of students who desperately need that. We know zero blood racist non-Slytherins whom attended Hogwarts. It never comes up as a motivator for Pettigrew or Quirrell, but there's Grindelwald, but he doesn't even go here. I also think it's notable Pettigrew, the evil Gryffindor's primary trait is that he's a cowardly rat. He's not the brave Gryffindor he's supposed to be. All this tells me, 1, evil in Harry Potter has a very specific look and attitude to assist the story's themes. It's parasitic. It cowers in the face of death. Voldemort's a pretty one-dimensional, hello, I'm evil bad guy. So it actually helps Harry Potter as a story that evil has this very specific aesthetic and mindset. It makes it feel like it's everywhere, that it infects things. It sort of helps Voldemort brute force his way into iconicness. But as a result, where evil comes from in this series is way too specific and can be easily simplified into not loving people enough and fearing death too much. Harry rarely deals with death anxiety. The times he does are memorable, but Harry Potter is more about grief and how it's entwined with love. 2, either Slytherins are all brainwashing each other once they're in the dungeon, or having the belief that non-magical people or Muggle-born people are lesser is a secret factored in value that's heavily weighted compared to other traits. And it will get you shoved face first into Salazar's steamy bowl of bigotry soup every time. When people get defensive about fans boiling down Slytherin into a house of bullies, I think they forget something very important. It's not just about these traits, there is a hidden value on this list. Draco was raised to have these biases. He showed up to the school with them, and what the school did was reinforce them by letting him live in a bubble. With the young Severus Snape, it's similar, but a little different. Snape had a physically abusive Muggle father. Half-Blood Prince is a little nickname that works on multiple levels. Prince is his mother's maiden name, and she was a witch. It's a way for his teenage self to reject his magic-hating Muggle father's family name. As a child, he befriended Harry's mother, Lily, and he would tell her about how they were special because they had magic and that they would go to Hogwarts, this wonderful magical place. Unfortunately for Snape, he was separated from his friend by the Sorting Hat. Growing up, he was harassed and attacked often by James Potter and his friends. This was ruthless bullying that on one occasion crossed the line into very public sexual harassment, and this was toned down in the movie. Book Snape was not the loner he looks to be in the movie's quick flashbacks. He retreated into the arms of his fellow Slytherins. Lily was infuriated by Snape's ability to hang out with Voldemort supporters, and Snape was furious that Lily would hang out with his bullies. This leads up to Snape calling Lily a mudblood and ruining their friendship forever. Now, if you were unaware of what Slytherin House was like, you might say, where the hell did that come from? When he started school, he was only biased against Muggles. How did his bigotry expand? Well, it came from his friends. It came from Slytherin's influence over him. Dumbledore has this line, you know, I sometimes think we sort too soon. We'll get to it, don't worry. There's an interesting metaphor in here somewhere that Slytherin House is a den of snakes that fills children with its venom, made funnier by the fact that their dorm is the Hogwarts dungeon, also known as a prison. And while the prison may seem comfortable and aesthetic, it's very much a magical blood racism factory, and their upbringing put them there. People who take Harry Potter House personality quizzes don't factor magical blood racism into the equation because why would they? And then these real people are given a house and they identify with it and buy keychains and sweaters. The official quiz is like, you like the moon? You like white cats and vampires? Wow, you're a Slytherin, a Muggle Slytherin, cue confused Salazar noises. I have seen Harry Potter fans pick what familiar they'd bring, what wand they would have. They typically don't imagine how blood racist they'd be. You know, not everyone can be Homestuck. The Hogwarts houses are presented to us as 4 valid choices, but they're not in their current form. We are presented with a pretty plausible system of indoctrination chilling out at Hogwarts in plain sight, sanctified in tradition, but the characters don't do anything about it. The story didn't show them becoming more than what they first appeared and rising to the occasion, which was the thing I think they set up most for. In the 5th year, the Sorting Hat sings out, "Oh, know the perils, read the signs, the warning history shows. From our Hogwarts is in danger from external deadly foes, and we must unite inside her, or will crumble from within. I have told you, I have warned you, let the sorting now begin." Well, no, apparently Hogwarts didn't have to unite. They didn't mention anyone remastering Slytherin House or the Hogwarts houses. And they didn't remove Slytherin as a house. No, don't Thanos snap my sweatshirt. I think it's the lack of action that bothers me. It's bothered me since I was a kid. It feels so unfinished. And it's surprising because it's such an obvious loose end. It's secondary to Voldemort, of course, but it's the true birthplace of Voldemort as a concept. And I've held off on telling you possibly the biggest missed opportunity, Slytherin students not participating in the Battle of Hogwarts like the other students. If properly built up, this would be a cool moment, especially when you consider how much scarier it would be for many of them, as they'd be going up against their own family in battle. It would give a sense that, yeah, maybe Harry is biased, and Slytherin House isn't just Draco and his loudest, dumbest, cruelest friends. And here's a laugh and a half. There is a Reddit post from 4 years ago of a confused fan asking why in random locations online, people talk as if Slytherin returned to the Battle of Hogwarts as reinforcements. It all seems to go back to one source, episode 131 of a podcast named Pottercast, where Rowling was a guest star.
Wow. And how much is it that being sorted into Slytherin is, sorted into good guys and bad guys here?
Well, they're not all bad. That would, I know I've said this before, and I think I said it to Emerson. They are not all bad, and well, far from it. As we know, at the end, they may have a slightly more highly developed sense of self-preservation than other people, because a part of the final battle that made me smile was Slughorn galloping back with Slytherins.
Yes,
but they'd gone off to get reinforcements first. You know what I'm saying? So that they came back. They came back to fight. So I'm sure many people would say, well, that's common sense, isn't it? Isn't that smart to get out, get more people and come back with them?
I have no idea what she's talking about. I can't find it. I feel like that would be a significant moment for Harry if he realized there were Slytherins who would fight. Did she retcon her story in a podcast? I can't fathom forgetting something like that. I sometimes think we sought too soon. By sorting the children, you're hypothetically judging them for their values. But there's something about this sentence I hate, especially when you consider how it goes unresolved. There shouldn't be a wrong place to put a child. Some aspects of Snape's backstory demonstrate the cruelty of the system and how it became a breeding ground for magical blood racism. And Dumbledore has dialogue expressing that he's beginning to see the problem, but no one fixes it. And I don't believe it. I don't believe Slytherin is actually reformed. I don't believe the root of the problem has been sufficiently addressed. They put a picture of Slughorn in the common room because of his bravery at the battle, which implies an ideological shift, but it's literally just hanging up a picture. If I were headmaster, I would get rid of Slytherin, or rework the sorting system completely. At the very least, make sure students get resorted every year. The existence of houses on their own isn't necessarily harmful to children. And a house that's central tenet is ambition, likewise, is perfectly fine to me. But the Hogwarts houses as they stand stupidly help promote the ideological fracturing of the adult wizarding world. I can't help but feel like a new Voldemort is going to sprout up from Slytherin like a dandelion, and the wizarding world is once again not going to be prepared for it. For me, it makes the deaths that occurred during the war and the victory at the Battle of Hogwarts feel a little pointless. And not in the a circle of violence way, or in a tragic pulling on your heartstrings way, but in a sort of, did I leave the stove on kind of way. Oh, I hate to do it to you, but statistically it works. If you're amused by the thought of fueling my Slytherin ambitions, then like this video and leave a comment to boost the algorithmic ranking. YouTube informs me that many of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribed, so please do that. Please subscribe and ring the bell. And if you're diehard enough about what I do here, you can support me on Patreon. Well, see you later.